In most D&D games, an occasional character death is inevitable at some point. But is a deadly game a better game for you? And how do you handle death at the table? Do you quickly move on, or do you kind of dwell on it and mourn together? In this video, I'll give you 7 tips for DMs and players when thinking about death in Dungeons & Dragons or other tabletop RPGs. Hi everyone, my name is Nate, and you are watching WASD20, a channel about tabletop RPGs and fantasy maps. So this video is going to be all about character death. And speaking of character death, when your DM kills your character for the 3rd session in a row, you'll be so glad you can find a great looking portrait for your new character quickly and easily with Portrait Workshop from WorldSpinner, my sponsor for this video. But seriously, Portrait Workshop is a tool that will allow us gamers to bring our characters to life in beautiful, full-color portraits as we envision them. Whether you're creating a character as a player or you're trying to find just the right look for your NPCs as a game master, you'll be blown away by the huge variety of options for customizing portraits. I got a sneak peek at the app a few weeks ago, and I genuinely cannot wait to get my hands on the finished product. So, go back Portrait Workshop now via the link in the video description. So in this video, I'll be sharing a few tips for players up front, though I do think there are some gems for the Dungeon Masters in there too, and then I'll be sharing some tips specific to DMs. So the first tip, players, don't fear death.
Oh God! Oh God, Grace! Grace, go watch the show! He's here for me, come on! All right, come on, give it to me!
How deadly a game should be is certainly a matter of preference, and the DMs should be honest about how deadly they envision their game will be and have a conversation about that. Communication and expectations are important. If you're tired of rolling up a new character every 2 or 3 game sessions, that's totally understandable, and you should probably talk to your DM. Now, some of this is definitely system dependent. In some game systems, you should just expect more character death than others, because that's the way the game is designed. But in terms of not fearing death, point number 2 is think about what a deadly game can provide. It's natural for a character death to be a sad thing, especially if it's a long-running character and the party has built strong bonds. But don't fight it too hard, because there are some really great benefits to a deadly game too. First, the possibility of death creates tension, and for many of us, it just makes for a more exciting game. A game where I don't feel like there's a realistic chance of my character dying, to me, just lacks a certain excitement. A more deadly game also makes strategy and teamwork more necessary, which are usually a good thing at the table. Also, death can make meaningful stories. It can be an epic moment, a heroic act of sacrifice, or even a final moment of redemption. Think of Boromir in Lord of the Rings, who had demanded the ring and turned on Frodo. Moments later, he realizes his mistake, and he finds himself fighting to the death against those who would do the hobbits harm, trying to give them a chance to escape. You feel that? I get a little bit every time. So many good books and movies include the death of a main character, and when done well, it contributes to the story. Now, it might not always be an epic, heroic death, and that can actually be okay too. I'm thinking of Iskloft, for example. This is an amazing Viking setting book for D&D 5e, and I'll put a link down in the description. The tone is brutal, and life in Iskloft is cheap. Death is rarely heroic. We can read in the book itself, in Iskloft, death or disfigurement can come at any time. Warriors do not always die in glory. As often as not, a knife finds the great hero in some backwater skirmish. That's a really specific tone, and a sudden and unexpected death in a brawl drives home a sense of this world. A brutal and less heroic death actually does serve a purpose here. It serves the purpose of making us feel that we are in Iskloft and feel what that world is like. In terms of contributing to the world or story, perhaps character death could also be a chance for DMs or players to flesh out the funeral rites in your setting. Are there any strange customs around death that you could narrate to help make the setting come alive? Tip number 3, players, roleplay. I know that's obvious, but what I mean is think of what your character would do in near-death situations. You know it's a game, and for some of you that means you're blowing off some steam on a Saturday night, and you might be more inclined to throw caution to the wind. And that's totally your prerogative if that's what you want to do, but it can be helpful to think, would my character do this? Would your character really fight to the death to protect the Earl's son? Or would they duck and run? On the flip side, don't get too fearful of death and overly cautious when you're playing, for example, a stupidly brave barbarian who you've planned to play as brash and hot-headed. Just play your character consistently and try to put yourself in their shoes. You can retreat from battle when it makes sense and be as smart or stupid, as brave or cowardly as your character would be. Tip number 4, and our final player-specific tip, keep an extra character at the ready. For me, I have several extra characters that I've created in D&D Beyond that I could pretty quickly level up appropriately or adjust or tweak a little bit to fit into the campaign. But you don't need a character sheet. I just don't think it hurts to have at least another potential character concept in mind so that you can quickly roll it up and get back to the action with your group if that's the way your DM wants to handle it. Also, the nice thing about rolling up a new character mid-campaign is that you can pay attention to what the DM has been laying down in terms of the setting and the lore and the tone of the game, and you can make a character that fits with all that. Tip number 5 is for the Dungeon Masters. Don't overdo the deadliness. The downside of an extremely deadly game is that players might not fully invest in their characters or the backstory if they think they're probably going to die soon. And that can hurt your game. Also, your players might hate you if you keep killing their characters, so, keep that in mind too. Tip number 6, also for Dungeon Masters, consider alternatives to death. Capture, for example, is one great alternative. Instead of death, the character is knocked unconscious and dragged away, maybe imprisoned somewhere. Now the rest of the party might have to rescue them. Or if the whole party is captured, they have to figure out a way to escape. That one can be especially useful if you want to avoid the total party kill. Resurrection is another alternative. Now, be a little bit cautious with this one. You don't want to cheapen death by making resurrection easily available. Resurrection often gets a bad rap because it's kind of seen as this failsafe that, no character ever really has to die permanently. So it's definitely a matter of preference in terms of maybe how gritty you want your game to be, but I think resurrection can be really cool. Make the party work for it though, don't make it too easy. Perhaps the resurrection quest turns into several sessions and becomes a major part of the storyline. Now the party must find the one wizard or cleric or whatever that can perform the needed ritual before the next full moon in 5 days' time. So those are a couple possibilities for alternatives to death, but let me know if you have any other alternatives down below. And tip number 7, when death occurs, Dungeon Masters, take it seriously. Don't act smug, just take a moment. If it's appropriate, you might ask the player if their character has any last words to utter before their life fades. You could ask them if they'd like to narrate the scene of their death, and even retcon the killing blow that happened 3 rounds ago as they rolled death saving throws. Just to make it more of an epic moment, if that's appropriate. Also, allow the rest of the party to mourn. Perhaps a burial isn't appropriate right on the spot, but think about how some sort of funeral or something might be appropriate where the player characters can give some last words. That's especially important, I think, if this is a long-running campaign where the characters have really formed a strong bond. So these have been my 7 tips for dealing with and thinking about death in D&D, but as always, I would love to hear from you. Are there any important considerations that you think I missed here? If so, let me know down in the comments below. Now, before we go, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons. Patrons are people who support WASD 20 on a monthly basis. I couldn't do it without these fabulous people. And if you want to join with them too, check it out over at patreon.com/WASD20. There's also some pretty cool rewards like weekly live streams with me and lots of other stuff. So go check it out. Lastly, earlier today, I was saddened by the news that Christopher Tolkien, the son of J.R.R. Tolkien, passed away. This man listened to his father's Hobbit story before it ever went to print, and he was one of the first fantasy cartographers, drawing the original map of Middle-earth that was published with Lord of the Rings in 1953. He made immense contributions to curating and editing much of his father's work, and fans of the fantasy genre owe him much. Anyway, he'll be missed, and we thank him for fulfilling his very noble quest as a steward of Middle-earth. Take care, everybody. You'll see me again very soon.